Welcome to Hustle and Flow with Heather Hubbard, episode number 99. Hi, I'm Heather Hubbard, and I was a litigator, partner, and practice group leader at an AmLaw 200 firm. I know what it takes to rise to the top. I also know all too well the toll it can take on your personal life. So how do you shine bright without burning out? How do you embrace your ambition without selling your soul? You're listening to the Hustle and Flow podcast. Welcome back. I am your host, Heather Hubbard, and it is January 1, 2019. Happy New Year, my friends. Can you believe that we are already at 2019? And can you believe that we are already at episode number 99? That is just insane to me. I never even planned to start a podcast. That was not, on my radar. My coach at the time, Rick Mulready, kept pushing me to start a podcast. I interviewed him in episode number 88. We talked about this story, but he encouraged me to do it. I jumped in. I am definitely coachable. And here we are, almost 100 episodes later. And so I want to do something a little special for us to celebrate 100 episodes together. So sometimes I'm out and I meet you guys for the first time, and you've been listening for 100 episodes, and you'll tell me, I feel like I've listened to every episode. I know so much about you. I love your advice. And sometimes I forget what even, I've talked about for 100 episodes, but you share with me the episodes that really had an impact on your life and your legal careers. And you share with me what resonated with you and how you've started using them in your life. And it is so meaningful for me to hear those stories, because you have to keep in mind, I'm recording this. Okay, so right now I'm recording this. I'm all by myself, except for Taylor, my cat, is sitting on the desk with me. And by the way, I'm not sitting on the desk. He's sitting on the desk by the laptop and the recording equipment. And then my two dogs, Parker and Jackson, one is on the right side, one is on the left side in the floor. So, I've got animals here, but it's just me. I'm the only human here. And so I share this stuff, and I only know that you enjoy it. I only know that it is having an impact when you share those stories with me. And so not only does it bring me joy to hear that this actually means something to you, but I think that your stories are, quite frankly, more powerful than mine, because sometimes I think people put me on a pedestal just because it's easy to say, oh, she's got a podcast, she's doing these other things, that's, not relatable. Maybe that works for her, but it won't work for me. And when you guys share your stories, it really does let others know that it might work for them as well. So to celebrate 100 episodes, I want to ask for your help. And I think this is going to be a lot of fun. We have a recorder set up, okay? If you go to heatherjoyhubbard.com/record, and this will be in the show notes. If you're on iTunes, it's right there on the podcast page. So you can just click that link directly out of iTunes in the description, and it will take you directly to that website with the recorder. And here's what I'd love for you to do. I want you to go on there, and I want you to record your name, tell us where you are, what you do, and then let us know the episode that you enjoyed the most. What is your favorite episode? And share with us what it is about that episode that has impacted your life or your legal career. Just share with us that tidbit of how you have taken that advice or that aha moment and really applied it so that you are seeing practical results. Because it's one thing to listen, it is another to take action. And so I want to share your stories. I want you guys to be the one really leading the way. So I would love for you to go do that. Timing matters, so please go do that soon. Again, just tell us who you are, your favorite episode, what you took away from that, and how you're using it in your daily life. And then I'm going to pick my favorite ones And I'm going to share a little bit as well. So it's going to be a really fun collaboration, montage of sorts to celebrate 100 episodes. So it would mean so much to me if you participate in that. So again, just go to heatherjoyhubbard.com/record, and you might just hear your voice on the podcast. Okay, let's talk about habits. It's the new year. A lot of you have resolutions. A lot of you have goals. If you participated in the planning extravaganza, hopefully you've already gotten some advice on this. Although when we were doing the live version, I was doing the live videos. And even when I gave you instructions, some of you, I don't know if you didn't understand or if you just disagreed, but you continued to have like entire lists of goals that were actually habit changes. So I've done a ton of podcasts on goal setting for the new year or just in general. And I've mentioned that habits are a bit different and much harder than goals, but I've never really gone into detail. And I notice each and every year that this trips people up a ton. And so I thought, you know what, we should really do an episode on it. But I don't really feel like I'm an expert in this. So I wanted to do some research and preparation. And what I found, what I thought was the best for you guys. So this is going to be mostly where I am pulling my information to share with you today. But if you really want to dig in, I highly recommend it. It's my number one resource for you on habits. It's called The Power of Habit: Why We Do What We Do in Life and Business. And it's written by Charles Duhigg. And again, we will put that in the show notes for you. It'll take you directly to Amazon if you'd like to buy your own copy. If you don't nerd out on this stuff and you are like, I just want the podcast, great. You're going to get what you need here. But if you want to read all about it and really dig in, I thought that his really explained things in a way that was easy to understand. It's got a lot of great stories with it, and it fully supports everything that I had ever learned and all of the previous research from books that are not as interesting related to the neuroscience of habits. So if you have on your list for 2019 anything related to a habit, this is a must listen for you. Okay, so what do I mean by habit? A habit is anything when you're setting a goal that says you are going to change a behavior or start a behavior that is going to require probably what you consider to be a ton of willpower and discipline. So many people think that they can just change their routines and their natural way of doing things through sheer force, right? So when we think about losing weight, when we think about eating healthier, when we think about drinking more water, when we think about getting up earlier or going to bed earlier, whatever that looks like for you, we tend to think, oh, if I just exercise enough willpower, then I can accomplish that. And so at the beginning of the year, more than any other time, this is when we say we're going to change all of those things. And we tend to say they're goals. And I don't like that because in my mind, a goal is something that you have strategy behind, that you're really working towards, where you're trying to achieve a result that is not based on behavior. Okay? When we start setting goals related to our behavior, what we're really saying is, I want to change a habit. Okay? And it's twofold because one, we're trying to create a new habit, and two, we're trying to override an old habit. And the reason why I think it's important to call this a habit change and not a goal is because it is so dang hard to do. And I always say, you can have up to 3 goals. When it comes to habit change, one at a time. I see so many people try to change so many things about themselves at the same time. You're barely going to be able to do one. I mean, seriously, that's just the cold hard truth. You're going to have a really hard time changing one habit. When you try to change multiple habits all at the same time, you are setting yourself up for failure and frustration and disappointment. And as you guys know, I'm all about results. Whether we call them habit changes or goals, I want you to see results. And I never want to see someone set themselves up for disappointment and frustration and failure. I would rather see you succeed. That's why I'm giving you this, real talk right now, because some of you are sitting there going, oh yeah, turns out I've got several things on my list this year that I'm doing that it's about changing my behavior. So unlike a goal where you're trying to achieve something unrelated to behavior, there's not a ton of neuroscience involved. It's more strategy and taking consistent action. That's really all it is. The only way that habit really comes in is if you need to develop habits around setting aside time to actually do the things you say you're going to do to accomplish your goals. Otherwise, it's not about habits. It's just about taking action. On the other hand, when we start to talk about habit change, basically we are talking about 100% neuroscience. Like it is just you trying to change your brain. And it can be done. We have research that shows it can be done. We also know it's very difficult to do. So what I love about the book, The Power of Habit, is it really walks through and explains why habits form so that you can work on rewiring your brain from an educated standpoint. Okay. So if you're thinking, I'm just going to wake up and go to the gym and I'm just going to do it, it's probably not going to stick. If you just think, oh, I have been craving donuts for breakfast every morning for the last 30 years, but this year I'm not going to, and your approach, your strategy is just to not eat the dang donut, you're in trouble because your brain is super, super strong, right? Okay. So I want to share with you the neuroscience, and then I want to share with you what Charles Duhigg recommends for attacking or changing the habits that you have if you have one of those as a goal or a resolution for the year. But again, I caution you to only do one at a time. Otherwise, you just don't have the time, energy, or effort to do them all, okay? So let's set you up for success. Just one only. So now let's go through it. Let's break it down. Okay, so let's start with the structure of the brain. So deeper in the core, right, when we get closer to the brainstem, that is where the older primitive structures exist, right? So the closer you get to the scalp, those are considered like they are closer to how we have evolved, right? They're more recent. And that's really where we develop new inventions and great new ideas, right? This is the part that allows us to build and innovate and laugh and play. It is the primitive structure at the core that really relates to all of these automatic behaviors. They've been around since, caveman time. And those are related to breathing, sleeping. You don't have to think about doing those things. You just do them. It is so ingrained. No one has to teach you, right? Like it is just there. It is as primitive as you can get. And that is where we develop our habits. And we don't think about it because we don't realize that we are developing habits. We generally don't wake up and say, I'm going to develop this habit. Now, at the new year, we do, but otherwise we don't. So this is very simple thinking, right? It's not complex. The complex is the outer layers. It is the simple that is the core primitive structure. And yet it is the one that tends to influence us the most, and we don't even realize it. So it wasn't until the 90s when we really started studying and understanding the basal ganglia related to habits and how we do things. There was a long time when we didn't believe that neural pathways could change. We thought they were just developed over time. And I've shared some of this before on the podcast, but there was this belief that once you created a neural pathway, it was basically set up for life. And it was through this research that really started in the 90s that we learned you can change neural pathways, but it's really difficult. Now, this is not scientific, but it's the way I visualize it in my head. So if it helps any of you, I'm going to share it. So I remember visiting Pompeii, I don't know, a decade or more ago. And there were these grooves in the streets, that had been preserved. And that was where the wheels, right, from the carts, where they would go over and over and over again. And so it would create these ruts. And the roads that were older had much deeper ruts. And the roads that were newer didn't have it as much. I also think about it, I grew up in Kentucky. So whether it's livestock or heck, even my dogs outside, they tend to follow the same path all of the time in the yard. And so, right, and it wears down the grass. And so, try moving that around and it's difficult, but it creates these grooves. So think about it in that same context. The longer that you've had this road, this highway in your brain, the longer you have been following that same path in your brain, it's got a deeper rut, right? So it's going to be much harder to build that back up and to have grass growing on it. Again, not scientific. This is just the way I visualize it. So if you have these habits that, again, start from the most primitive part of your brain, but they have been creating these neural pathways, these messages, these shortcuts for, I don't know how old you are, but depending on when this started, maybe it's 10 years, maybe it's 30, maybe it's 50 years. You've got some really deep ruts in your brain that that is going to be the go-to shortcut. Kind of like my dogs or livestock, you can move them in a different direction. But as soon as you open up that old path, they're going to go right back to it. Okay. That's what this is all about from a habit standpoint. You don't even know you're doing it. It's just what you want to go to. Well, in the 90s, they did this research with a man named Eugene Pauly. And they followed him and did so much research and learned so much about habits when he was alive and was able to basically allow the researchers to learn from him because he had an illness where most of his brain was damaged and he had no memory. Okay. So you might tell him something 1 minute and 5 minutes later, he had no recollection that you had that conversation. But he was still doing things that didn't make sense. So for example, he could leave his house, go for a walk and come back home. And he could go to the kitchen and he could make himself breakfast. But he couldn't tell you where the kitchen was, where the food was, or how he made it, right? There was zero memory. And yet he knew these things. Yet he could somehow find his way back home when he left the house. And what they learned was his basal ganglia was still intact. And so that was still forming habits. And they were able to do a ton of different experiments to figure out exactly how those patterns and habits were formed. Before that, most of it was, done on rats and other things, animals. So it's really interesting in that they figured out that it's not conscious at all. We just do these things. And what they learned was, it starts with, so here's how a habit is formed, and this is going to help you if you're going to try to attack and change a habit or create a new one. So obviously pattern and repetition matters, but there are 4 components that really have to be in place for it to become a true habit that is automatically happening without you thinking about it. The first is a cue. Something is giving you a cue that it's time to do something else, okay? This can be any number of things. It can be a noise. It can be a smell. It can be waking up, all right? So let me finish this loop conversation and then I'll come back to some of my own. Okay, so 1, you've got to have the cue. Once you have the cue, 2, you take action. There's some kind of routine that you're doing, okay? And then number 3 is there is a reward. A reward, not punishment, a reward. There's a cue, there's a routine, and there's a reward. And then the fourth piece is there is a craving. There is a craving. The craving, and we're going to get into this. It's the timing of the craving that then triggers the habit. That's what makes it, you just do it, right? Okay. Let's talk about my coffee habit. All right. The cue for me is that I wake up. That is literally the cue. I wake up. I feed my animals. And what comes next is a cup of coffee. Okay. And then that cup of coffee, it has caffeine in it, so that can be a reward. It tastes delicious, so that's a reward. It makes me so happy. I was actually telling someone, I think it was Nicole Abood. We've had her on the podcast before. She had an Instagram story where she was saying something about coffee and how much she enjoyed it. And I told her, I said, I often get excited thinking about my coffee the night before. So I only allow myself to have up to 3 cups of coffee, and I have to cut it off by 10 a.m. And then I get no more. So what that means is by the evening, when I'm preparing for bed, I often think about the coffee that I get to have in the morning. Okay, so do you recall that I said that the fourth piece was a craving? This is how you make a habit. I crave the coffee. I crave the coffee so much so that I am getting the reward before I ever get the coffee. I'm going to say that again because it's super, super important. I get the reward before I ever drink the coffee. This is what causes the habit. So with rats, other things, as they were testing these concepts, what they would learn is there's the cue. Now, this is when they first introduce them to something, right? There's the cue. It might be a click, a sound, a light, whatever. And then they are doing the routine and then they get the reward. Well, initially, the basal ganglia, it spikes when you hit the reward. Well, the more you do it, the more you anticipate the reward. And the basal ganglia, like it spikes as soon as you have the cue, before you even start the routine. The cue itself is what delivers basically the endorphins for the reward before you even receive it. And that's what then creates the habit, or what many of us would call an addiction. But sometimes it's not like a substance like caffeine or something else, but it gives you that pleasure point that you just would never even imagine, like you wouldn't not do it. That's what makes it just so habitual. And you can use this information to break habits. You can also use this information to develop habits. But I think it's helpful for you to understand just how powerful this is, because all of the large companies and all of the advertising agencies, they use this same neuroscience research to hook you on their products and to, whether it's trick, manipulate, persuade, whatever, you to buy them in the first place, okay? But they want you to buy them and then they want you to get hooked so you'll keep buying them. Video games, app developers, they used neuroscience, right? They used this habit loop research to create notifications on your phone and on your desktop. Just keep that in mind, all right? So if you feel like you are constantly looking at your phone, just know that it was developed to create a habit. It was developed to make you to need and want to go back to it all of the time. And that is why I always encourage people, if you've done my Get It Done challenge or anything else, to turn off the dang notifications. Like they were designed to hook you. And if you know that, then hopefully that can help you see it's not a good thing. So the cue is the notification, right? You get the ding, or it says 1, 2, 3. There's a counter. Even if you don't have the ding, you see the count. Or maybe if you don't have the ding, you still have it pop up on your computer, right? It comes up in the bottom right-hand corner that you've got something new. So then the routine is, I've got to check it, right? I've got to open up the email and see what it says. And then the reward is that, and when you do get a hit of dopamine, the reward is you just got to, like, we enjoy reading the email. We enjoy having that counter at 0. We are like mice and monkeys in that, like, we hear the ding, we want to push the button. So it was literally designed to distract you nonstop and make you come back to it. So the interesting thing is, even like with the mice, and again, I'm a vegetarian, so I hate even sharing some of this stuff, but this is the way they do research. They would then introduce like shock, electrocution, other things that would like disturb the mice after the habit was formed, and it didn't stop them. They craved that reward so much that whatever the negative consequence was, the mice didn't care. And the same is true for humans, right? This is how we have bad habits, and we know they're bad for us. We know the negative consequences, and yet we can't seem to stop. One of the quotes from the book that stood out to me was, "We might not remember the experiences that create our habits, but once they are lodged within our brains, they influence how we act, often without our realization." And then it goes on to say, they shape our lives far more than we realize. They are so strong, in fact, that they cause our brains to cling to them at the exclusion of all else, including common sense. Okay? So this is why we can be very smart people, and yet habits have such a strong hold on us. Okay? They are in the most primitive parts of our brain. So in the book, they share certain cues that have created kind of like epidemics in the US. And one is McDonald's. They too used habits and neuroscience to help create cravings. So the cue is the golden arches, right? And their reward is the way that they made their food, right? It almost melts in your mouth as soon as you get it, the grease and the salt. So that's the cue. Others have used it to basically change the culture of America, although I think McDonald's probably changed the culture as well. But they were talking about toothpaste and toothbrushes, brushing your teeth. So in the US, during, I believe it was World War I, all of the recruits that were coming in had such bad dental health and hygiene, right? Like their teeth were rotting, that they determined it was an issue of national security. But they couldn't get people to want to brush their teeth. No matter how many times they told Americans, you need to brush your teeth. It's good for your health. No one cared. They didn't do anything about it, right? It's kind of like current day. They were talking about sunscreen. We know that sunscreen, putting that on each and every day, like on your face, on your arms, it can drastically reduce skin cancer. And yet, no matter how much is put out there from a public service announcement, people just don't put it on. And so when they were trying to get people to brush their teeth, what they ended up hooking them on was not the health. I mean, it's so hard to imagine not brushing your teeth, but apparently like it was less than 10% of Americans who actually brushed their teeth at this time. So, we're talking like 100 years later, we now can't imagine not brushing your teeth. And we don't think about it. We just do it. So how did that catch on? Well, what they were able to do is they said, think about, there's this film on your teeth. Rub your tongue on your teeth and you'll feel this film. And you probably just did it right now, right? It created this cue that people could easily do. They wanted to see, and they could feel this film. Now, the film is natural. It's not actually an indication that your teeth are dirty, but it was something that people could latch onto. And they said, if you use this toothbrush, it will remove that film and your teeth will, like your mouth will feel great, right? So it was not about health. It was about feeling good. And the other part of that really made it take off, because they had tried some of that before, was they added to it something that would make your mouth, it's an irritant actually, feel a little bit tingly. That was the reward. That was the reward. It was a physical sensation. It was the tingling. That is not required. It's not needed for toothpaste, but almost every toothpaste company now has it, because we all get that reward. And so now if, you wake up and you don't get the tingle, you're like missing the reward. So that's how they got all of America to start brushing their teeth, was talking about a cue of film on your teeth that you can feel with your tongue, and then creating a physical sensation with tingling. Same is true for, they said, mostly with foam. So for example, they said the foam in your shampoo, the foam in your toothpaste, the foam in your laundry detergent, the foam in your dishwasher soap. None of it is required. It actually has nothing to do with getting anything clean. But we have associated that foam with the reward of it being clean. It's a fascinating book, but it just goes to show how unconscious our habits are and how we get hooked on things without knowing what it is. And so that leads me to, if you are working on changing your habits, and again, please only focus on one at a time, the best way to go about it is to figure out what the cue is. Because if you're trying to create a new habit, it's because you've already got a bad old habit, like an old, negative bad habit, right? So you need to start there. And you need to find out, you need to ask yourself, you need to do some work around what is the cue, because you probably have no idea. Okay, so I'll tell you something. I pick at my fingers. I always have since I was a little girl. And it can be really bad. Like I sit there and pick and pull. And I was really trying to figure out, what is my cue? What makes me start doing that? And it's when I'm bored. It's when I'm bored. It's when I'm just sitting still. I could be in a meeting, but I'm bored. And that's my cue to start. So as soon as I'm bored, without me even thinking about it, my body, my hands naturally go to picking at my fingers. And oddly enough, the reward is actually the pain. Like it's the irritation, but it's a physical sensation. So one of the things that has actually helped me, it doesn't fully change it because again, that rut is deep. You're going to always naturally go back to it. So even if you create a new habit that's working well, it doesn't mean you're not going to fall back into the old one. It's for me to have a good manicure or gel on my fingernails, because when I'm bored, now what I do, the cue is for me to kind of rub the fingernail itself, which is not hurting my fingers, but I still get the sensation of that reward. So one of the things that they say you can do is figure out your cue. That is key. Figure out your cue. What's causing something? And then keep the reward the same. All right. So now the reward is not the pain of me pulling my fingers, but the reward is still a physical sensation. So hopefully that makes sense. You want to keep it within that same family. The key is to simply change the routine, right? So you're just moving one piece out. The other is to disrupt the pattern. So for example, let's say when I am feeling sad, or when I am feeling angry or frustrated or disappointed, that's my cue to have a glass of wine, or that's my cue to eat something unhealthy, right? Because it's soothing, it's rewarding. It's the routine that creates the habit. So if I can plan out times to give myself wine or food that I wouldn't otherwise eat at completely random times in a way that makes no sense, it disrupts the pattern and my brain can't figure out where to categorize it. It really messes with the shortcut. It's when you allow all of your bad habits to be related to the cue that it just happens without you even thinking, okay? So sometimes it's about allowing yourself to do the bad thing at times where your cue does not exist because it disrupts that pattern. So if you're thinking about creating a new habit, right? So let's say you're trying to lose weight or something like that. You need a cue. If you're trying to create a new habit, you need a cue. So whether that is as soon as you wake up, like you've got shoes by your bed and you go ahead and lace them up. And so like you're going to go to the gym every day at the same time. You've got to have that cue. The cue's got to be the same each and every day. That's what's going to create this habit where it's not about willpower. It just becomes part of your routine. And then you need the routine, and then you need a reward. You need a reward. If you don't have a reward, you're not going to create a habit. So for some people, the reward is they actually enjoy working out, like they get the runner's high or whatever else. I don't get that. I don't understand it, but a lot of people do. So that can end up being their reward. Some people, so when I was training for a half marathon, this worked for me. It was the achievement of knowing what I accomplished, right? So I would feel great about having gone and done something. So it wasn't that I felt good after running. It was that I knew how many miles I had logged and I was impressed with myself, right? This is the high achiever. So that can be a reward. So think about that. What's your cue? What's your routine? And what's your reward? And you'll know you're starting to create a habit when you experience the craving for the reward, you experience the results of the reward before you ever start the routine. All you need is the cue and you start to feel good. Okay? If you're not feeling that, then you're not creating a habit loop. And you'll need to figure out what your reward looks like. The whole punishment thing, that doesn't work. It's got to be an immediate reward. And it can even be something, again, like tracking numbers or something that allows you to feel accomplished. It doesn't have to be, a donut for not doing the donuts. So I hope this has been helpful. And what's interesting, what I love is that without even knowing it, that's kind of how I created the planner, the Life and Law Planner. So in it, it's about monthly, weekly, and daily planning. So the planner itself can be the cue. Like you walk into the office and if it's sitting there, that's the cue. The cue is it's now time to prioritize for the day. That's the routine. And the reward is you get to see your progress daily, but you get check boxes. And this might sound crazy, but look, we are gold star kind of people. And I did it because that's what I like to do. I like to check things off. So that can be the reward. You get to check that box off. If you don't check it off, like you feel sad, you feel disappointed. If you get to check it off, you get that reward. And so for me, when I, wake up as I'm having my coffee, I already know what my day looks like. I'm already craving going to my page to start checking things off. And so I loved when I was reading this that I had literally created the planner as a way to form habits without even realizing it. So for those of you that are needing and wanting the time management or a planning system that works, good news, it literally is set up so that it can create a habit. So go get you a copy while you still can. It is not intended to replace your online calendar. You can if you want, but a lot of people think it's just a calendar. It's not. It was designed to help you reach your goals. So I hope this has been helpful. You've got some ideas on how to attack that one habit that you're going to address if you're going to. And hopefully it's helped you see how this repetition, these cues, these routines, these rewards can really, set you up for success as well. So go get your 2019 Life and Law Planner if you don't have it already. It's at lifeandlawplanner.com. This has been a long episode, but lots of good nuggets in there. I hope you found it helpful. And again, go leave a recording for me, heatherjoyhubbard.com/record, to let me know your favorite podcast episode and how it has impacted your life or your legal career. All right, that's it for today. Happy New Year. I will see you next week. I am super excited to announce that the Life and Law Planner is officially here. It is more than just a calendar. It is a full planning system. If you want to take back your days, your weeks, your months, and your year, order your planner now. It will completely change your life and help you accomplish your biggest goals. There's only a limited quantity available, so go to lifeandlawplanner.com and order yours today.